It's streaming.
Right now?
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Should I leave? Should I keep the screen on the screen? And when it's done, I'm curious as to how I'm going to see it. So remember last time there was an issue. Just leave it. So where's the record button? This one?
Really?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Okay. Do you want the edge of the screen?
Well, I don't know if it's on the screen.
Like that one.
Hello. What was that, Matt?
Yeah, automatically does. So now we're recording.
Highly doubt anybody's even watching this right now.
Can you describe what's going on then? Like, what was that they were just playing? That was just from here. It's kind of like a space. Yes, it wasn't recording.
Can you change that?
I don't know.
Now, if you were doing something like this and you wanted to do can you do a commercial? Like, please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
That'd be like, you can do stuff like that. Like, you can have multiple cameras with audio. And you can actually, you can only one camera with the three. Any tips on the camera handling?
Hey guys.
Okay.
He's here.
Okay.
Have we done the sound checks and everything? Everything's good? Everything's good?
Good. All right, I'll go get the lapel.
Take that stuff down. I'll get the lapel.
What do you want taken down?
Everything.
Everything? Where do you want to put?
Just staging right over there for now, and then we'll move it. Completely protected?
Yeah, it's been a while. Exactly.
Okay, we're going to get started. If you want to come and get a seat at a table. Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to give a quick announcement before Lizina gives us an introduction for our speaker this afternoon. So first of all, thanks for coming out. I think this is a really great opportunity for us to hear some different voices here, right here on our campus. And I want to give a great shout out for the great job that both Lizina Shaduri and her brother, who just showed up today, they both founded, and they really worked hard on this club. And it's events like these that are really meaningful and have really made a big difference on this campus. And last night, MSA won Club of the Year Award, so just give a round of applause. Okay, and now I will leave it to Lizina.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lizina Chowdhury. I'm the president of Muslim Student Association here at Penn State Brandywine. On behalf of our MSA family, I would like to thank you all for coming in today and welcome you with the Islamic greeting. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon you all. We are very honored to have Sheikh Saad Tasleem here with us as a guest speaker today. Saad Tasleem was born and raised in the United States of America. He attained his bachelor's in design with a minor in psychology from the University of Maryland. He then went to study at the Islamic University of Medina. There he attained a diploma in Arabic language and a bachelor's in Islamic law. Since graduating from the University of Medina, Saad Tasleem has traveled all across the globe as an instructor for Al-Maghrib Institute and as a public speaker and a lecturer. He has a wide following among the youth all across the world, and he has an uncanny ability to connect with young generation. He is well known across several social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and Tumblr. Today he is going to speak to us about peace and unity. After the presentation, we will serve Middle Eastern food for lunch. If there's any questions you would like to ask the speaker, you are welcome to join us for the Q&A session right here at 1:30. If you have a class, please feel free to email me or other MSA board. We'll forward the questions to Brother Saad Tasleem, inshallah. At this point, Penn State Brandywine, join me in welcoming Saad Tasleem on the stage.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. I begin in the name of God, and I send peace and blessings upon his final messenger, Muhammad, and all the prophets and messengers who came before him. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings and mercy of God be upon all of you. First of all, I'd like to say I'm very honored to be here, and it's always great to speak to a mixed audience. And what I mean by a mixed audience is a Muslim and non-Muslim audience. Usually in my everyday life and my lectures, I'm mostly speaking to a Muslim audience. So it's a nice treat for me when I get to have an even more varied audience. Now, the topic, peace and unity. Now, as a Muslim, and many Muslims can attest to this, when we hear the terms peace and unity, they seem like very cliche topics to us. And that's because you'll often find a lot of public speakers, a lot of lecturers. This is a topic that is often given to them, obviously because of the political climate and things happening in the world, the just general social situation. And so I wanted to take a little bit of a different approach toward the topic of peace and unity. And I wanted to do that by speaking about peace and unity through the door of challenges and adversity. And I think for a lot of people, when we think of peace and unity, one of the things that comes to our mind is there are challenges. There are challenges on the path towards peace and unity. And I think I believe this truly in my heart, that there is no human being, no sane, logical human being, except that deep down inside, somewhere in their heart, that's what they desire for themselves, and that's what they desire for their fellow man. So that's a quest that we all have, and we would all like to achieve that, as I said, in our personal lives, in our relationships, in our communities, in the country we're living in as Americans, and even globally as a whole. So that's a goal for all of us, and I think one of the points is, or one of the problems that we face is, well, it seems like something which is almost unattainable. When we think about, especially on a global level, I know personally that's a different path, it's a different discussion, but when we think about peace and unity on a global level, or even nowadays with what's happening in America, we may look at the American situation and American society and feel like maybe peace and unity is just a dream. With especially the election coming up and this election being so polarizing, where we have, the Donald Trump supporters and the Bernie supporters and so on and so forth, and we've seen what's happened at some of the rallies and all that kind of stuff. So it may seem like it's something that is almost unattainable. But for me, my message is always a message of hope. And we have to have hope, otherwise we're going to become stagnant. And that's why hope is so very important on the path to peace and unity. And what that means is that we understand that, first of all, we're real about the situation, right? It's easy, and this is a process some people take. Just close your eyes and just, it's like, let me just do my own thing. Let me just, things are happening in the world, things are happening in my country, I'm just going to do whatever I have to do. And the whole, when we heard a lot of people saying that, hey, if Trump becomes president, then I'm just moving to Canada. And for me, I'm like, that's such a cop-out, right? Like, that's it. And you heard, some immigrant Muslims were like, maybe I'll go back to my home country, a country they've never visited, they don't know anything about it, they've never lived in that society. They're like, maybe I can go back home or to my parents' country. And like I said, to me, that's a total cop-out. Because that is kind of almost like putting your head in the sand, putting your head in the dirt, and saying, listen, I don't have the courage, or maybe the patience, or I just feel like it's beyond me to deal with the reality of the situation that we're living. As a Muslim, it is part of our faith, actually, that we believe this is part of our creed, that there's no such thing as a life without challenges. And that's why, as Muslims, we look at the prophets and the messengers as examples for us. And God tells us in the Quran that the Prophet Muhammad, it says, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ, which means that for you, in the messenger of God, there was an amazing example. And so we take him as an example. And one of the ways, or one of the things we learn from his life, is how to deal with adversity. And not only how to deal with adversity, but to be hopeful in difficult times, in times where we feel like the hardships are becoming too much. And that's why the Prophet, one of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, they asked him, they said, who is tested the most severely? Like, who has the most, what type of person has the most hardship in their life? And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he replied, the prophets and the messengers. And then those who are closest to them, meaning closest to them in piety and goodness, and then those who are closest to them, meaning the more one leads a life like the lives of the prophets, the more hardship and adversity they will face. And like I said, this is something that we saw in the life of the Prophet Muhammad. And any prophet, going all the way back to Adam, peace be upon him, every single prophet, we see that they all face difficulty and hardship. And if you just take a look at the life of the Prophet Muhammad, you see that there's almost no difficulty that we as human beings that we can go through or experience, except that he dealt with something very similar. And I can give many, many examples of this, and I'll just give you just a few. If you talk about the loss of a loved one, which you'll hear many people say that probably the most difficult thing that a human being can go through in this life is the loss of a loved one, and then even harder or harsher than that is losing a child. And being a new parent myself, I can tell you that I'd heard that a lot before, and I was like, yeah, okay, that's probably true, it's probably fine. But being a new parent myself, I truly now believe that, yes, that is probably one of the most difficult things that a human being can experience, and that is to lose a child, especially a young child. And so we saw in the life of the Prophet Muhammad that he lost a child. He lost a few children. There's actually one incident where his son was dying. He was an infant, a small child. And the Prophet Muhammad, he held him against his breast, and he held him as he breathed his last breath. And tears rolled down his eyes. And one of the things we as Muslims, we learn from that is that, we are going to face adversity. There are going to be hardships in life. And it is okay to be sad. But being sad and facing hardships and facing adversity shouldn't be something that stagnates us. Meaning, it shouldn't be something which puts us in a position where we can't move forward. And that's just one example. The Prophet Muhammad lost his first wife, which many of the scholars in Islam, they consider that to be, or consider her to be, the love of his life. He actually even made many statements in his life where he said that I've never loved anyone, I've never loved any human being more than I loved his wife's name, Khadijah. I've never loved anyone more than Khadijah. And he lost her. And he actually lost her at a very difficult time where he was facing a lot of opposition and oppression from the community that he was living in. And then in that same year, he lost his uncle. And his uncle was his support, his backing, his political, financial support when most of the community had abandoned him. And so that actually, the scholars refer to that period of his life, that year of his life, as the year of sorrow. Because he lost his wife, and his wife, by the way, his wife was the first person that he turned to when he received the message of Islam. When the angel Gabriel, brought the message of Islam to him, he was shaken, he was worried, he didn't really fully comprehend what was going on, and he ran to his wife, and his wife provided him with comfort and support. And that's part of the reason why he loved her so much, because he felt that support from her. And she was there for him since day one, and he lost her. And then he lost his uncle. And then he turned to other places for help, and we know stories of him being driven out of cities, people pelting him with rocks and so on and so forth. And this story is not a new story. There's, as a Muslim in Islamic history, when we look at history, we look at the lives of all the prophets, and we see much difficulty and adversity and hardship in their lives. And as I said, the lesson for us really here is that we cannot become stagnant when we are faced with difficulty. Even if you look at a lot of Muslims today, will say one of the challenges, or especially American Muslims, will say one of the big challenges that we're facing today is Islamophobia, or fear-mongering about Islam, a misunderstanding of Islam, a misrepresentation of Islam, people becoming scared of Islam and Muslims. And it's interesting that if you take a look at the life of the Prophet Muhammad, he went through the same thing. When he first started preaching the message of Islam, when he first came out and said, there's only one God, like leave all the idols, leave everything else aside, you only have one creator, there's only one Lord. And since you only have one creator and one Lord, only that creator and Lord deserves to be worshipped, so leave everything else. He was going against the way of life of the people that he was living amongst. And actually, idols and idol worship was a huge part of the economy of the Arab society that he was living in. So he faced a lot of adversity, and one of the ways they dealt with that message is that they started lying about him, and they started saying things about him that weren't true. They started fear-mongering. They started saying, don't listen to this man, stay away from this man. He's leading you to a life which will take you away from the life of your forefathers and the lifestyle of your forefathers. And one of the things that they would do is actually they would have people stand at the outskirts of the city of Mecca. And they would have people, like they had little balls of cotton, and anyone coming into the city, they'd say, here, put this in your ears as soon as you come across Muhammad, peace be upon him. Why? Because, well, if you just, like he's like a magician and a soothsayer. He's going to entice you with his words. He's going to bewitch you or something like that. And so they'd say, just make sure you don't even hear what he has to say. And that's one of the reasons for that, is because a lot of people accepted Islam simply by hearing the Quran being recited. And actually, we as Muslims consider that to be one of the miraculous natures of the Quran, that simply listening to the book itself, that it is such a beautiful book that, even that may incline someone's heart towards Islam. And that happened, that continued to happen, and actually, even because of that Islamophobia, he was physically harmed as well. There were, at all times, there were people following him. Like every time he would walk out in the city, there would be people following him. And as soon as he would say anything, or he would start to recite the Quran, there would be a guy like 2 steps behind him saying, "Don't listen to him. He's a liar. He's a soothsayer. He's this and that. He's gonna ruin your life," and so on and so forth. So that was his daily life, and that's what he dealt with. We know that people started to hate him to the point where it's a very famous story, which Muslims, a lot of us we know this. We've been taught this as children. That there was a woman who would dump her garbage on him every single day. Like she'd wake up in the morning and she'd look over the ledge. She would see Muhammad, peace be upon him, walking, and she'd take out her morning garbage and throw it on him. And he would simply just brush it off and go about his day. And this kept happening day after day after day after day, until a day came where the Prophet Muhammad walked out of his house and no garbage was thrown on him. And he's like, "What's going on? What's happening?" So he went to her house to ask about her. And he knocked on the door, and she opened the door, and she said, "I just came here to see if you're okay, because nobody threw garbage on me today." And she said, "Yeah, I'm not feeling well, and so I wasn't able to throw garbage on you." And he said, "Okay, I just wanted to make sure that you're okay." And her heart was so softened towards Islam that she actually sat and then listened to the Prophet Muhammad. And she actually ended up becoming Muslim. So that Islamic women, that story itself is such a big lesson for us, for Muslims, dealing with what we're dealing with today. But there were stories like that. There were stories where people would come, the Prophet Muhammad would be praying in Mecca, and people would come and they would hit him, they would strike him, they would throw things on him. And these are all, when hatred is born and when hatred is spread, then people often turn to physical action. And once again, Prophet Muhammad dealt with that. That's something it's a very real example for us that this is something that he had to deal with. And like I said, so for Muslims, it's part of our creed. We're like, you know what? Life has its ups and downs. There's no such thing as a life that's just completely, just plateaus and it just stays constant. Life is ever changing. There's ups and there's downs. There are times of happiness and there's times of sadness. There are times of ease and there are times of difficulty. And we look at what's happening today and the pressures and issues that we're dealing with, even on a societal level, even on a human level, we look at that as a normal way of life. And so when adversity strikes, two things can happen. And two things tend to happen. All right? I would say there's two main streams. One stream is that adversity can make people stronger and better. And on the other hand, adversity can do the opposite. It can make people weaker, and it can make people lose their morals and the goodness that's found in them. And as an American, and seeing what America has been going through, starting with 9/11, and I was actually, when 9/11 happened, I actually wasn't really even interested. I was born a Muslim, my parents were Muslim, but I never really cared for Islam at all. My parents, they raised us in a way where they never enforced any type of religion upon us. So I remember as a young child, my mom telling me that I'm not going to make you become Muslim, or you have to find your own way, you have to find your own path. And interestingly enough, my mom now is a practicing religious woman now. But back then she was like, you know what, you just find your own way and all that. And so at that point in my life, I actually wasn't, I was identified as a Muslim, but more so culturally than anything else. If I were to think about my beliefs and all that, even if someone were to ask me, did you believe in God back then, I'd say, I don't know, because I didn't really even think about it. It's just something that never really crossed my mind. But that was where I was spiritually, that's where I was when 9/11 happened. And 9/11 for me was a big awakening because all of a sudden, there were a lot of people asking me questions about my religion. A religion that I didn't really know anything about, besides some things which I wasn't even sure. I was like, is this my culture? Is this part of the culture? Is this part of the religion? This is something Muslims do it all the time, differentiating between things that are put on us or things that are taught to us which have nothing to do with Islam, but they're cultural things, and people assume that that's what Islam teaches, and that's not the case. So that's one of the struggles that I went through, and in that time, when all that was going down, I remember that someone had given me a bumper sticker, and it had a verse in the Quran on it. And I was like a bumper sticker collector back then. Now my car has no bumper sticker, but back then, Every concert that I go to, I put a bumper, I get a bumper sticker. Every band that I like everything just went on the bumper of my car. So there was another bumper sticker I had, is like a verse from the Quran. Like I wasn't really a practicing Muslim, but it still was kind of part of my identity. And I remember the day 9/11 happened. I went to my car and I stared at my bumper stickers, and I was like, yeah, I gotta take that off, because people are angry, people are upset, people are looking for someone to blame, and that makes me a clear target. Little did I know that years later, that our identities are going to become that much of an issue. Little did I know that my sisters in faith will be targeted because simply you can look at them and identify them as a Muslim. And I think that for me, what I've noticed is, in the last 10 years or so, is that, and I honestly, and I don't have any problems about saying this, the challenges our sisters face are far more difficult than the guys. I mean, look at a Muslim guy, even if he's got like a beard or whatever, like in this day and age, people will be like, Muslim or hipster? Like, which one is it? But when you look at a Muslim sister, with the head covering, the hijab, like there's no question there. And so they may immediately become a target of hatred. And so what I noticed in that time was Muslims, Muslims went one of two ways. Either they kind of like left Islam, they were leaving, or not really leaving Islam itself, not denouncing the faith, but kind of leaving off the apparent aspects of Islam. People stopped praying publicly. A lot of sisters took off their scarves. My brothers shaved their beards, obviously pre-hipster time, so beards were still identified as like a religious thing. And so that happened. But on the other hand, there were Muslims who became stronger. And I was one of those Muslims, and by stronger, I mean I started to educate myself about my religion. I started to learn about my religion, and that's why I know you guys heard the bio, those of you who are paying attention. I went to the University of Maryland. I was studying design, graphic design, and psychology, and stuff like that. And my goal in life was actually music. I had a music career laid out in front of me. I was hoping my band would get a record deal and become rich and famous. Like that was where my life was headed right before 9/11. And then 9/11 hit, and I'm like, hold on, I need to learn about Islam. Like people will come up to me and ask me, like, and I don't really know much about Islam. And that's when I took a path to, start to study Islam on an academic level. And that, in hindsight, to me, I could have gone the other way, where I could have been like, you know what, I could have, kept taking off more bumper stickers and going down that way, but I chose to strengthen myself. I chose to educate myself. I chose to learn. And Muslims as a whole went those two ways. Yeah, some people stayed kind of like where they were, but a lot of Muslims were either like went towards this way, or they, as we said, got stronger. The communities got stronger. People they bound together and started working together. And once again, and I feel like every time like a terrorist attack happens, or there's like Islam is once again, like ISIS does some insane thing. Once again, Muslims are like, what do we do? Is this the time now? Should I now stop, practicing my religion? Or, the other thing is we feel a sense of urgency, where people are going to have questions. How do I answer those questions? And one of the things that I often tell young Muslims is, now more than ever, it is imperative that we educate ourselves about our religion. And an average person will come up to you and ask you a simple question, which, 10, 15 years ago, like growing up in America, nobody ever asked me this question. And I went to middle school and all that kind of stuff. I went to high school. I never got that question. That question is, somebody comes up to you, and I heard this from actually a 10-year-old whose mom was like, hey, my 10-year-old came and asked me this question. And I'm like, why did your 10-year-old ask this question? And they're like, well, because someone in school asked the question. And the question is this: are Muslims inherently violent? Is Islam inherently a violent religion? Now, as a 10-year-old, I can't, this kid was very courageous to even hear that and be patient, be like, I don't know, let me go ask my parents, whatever. But I don't even know how, Saad, Tasleem as a 10-year-old, how I would have dealt with that situation. And it probably would have really made me feel isolated from the society that I, would feel a part of normally. And so those are real questions, and even a question like that, I often tell Muslims, do you know the answer to that question? And do you know how to respond in that case? And so now, like I said, adversity, one way is weakness and, kind of losing hope and giving up, and the other is strengthening yourself, coming together. And we have seen unity now in the Muslim communities across America like we have never seen before. like many of the other faiths, almost all other faiths, there's always differences within the religion. That's normal. It's just life. But now we have seen Muslims come together, and to me, that's one of the blessings of adversity. Now also, if I were to apply that to America and American society, I think now is our test. Now is our challenge. Like, as Americans, now that we're facing terrorism, and we're facing some very real threats, what path do we take as Americans? Do we take the path of hatred? And do we take the path of bigotry? Do we take the path of fear-mongering? Do we start turning against one another? Do we let go of our ideals, the ideals that this country was built upon? Do we let go of so many things that in the generations that came before us, people fought and struggled and gave their lives for those ideals and those morals, starting from the birth of this nation. And you move forward a bunch and you get to the civil rights movement. And once again, like, I look at the situation now, and I'm like, if we fail now, we are failing the civil rights movement. Because all the work that they did, everything, all the lives that were given, all the sweat and tears and blood that was shed at that time, would once again, we're reverting back to zero now. If we don't stand strong, if we do not unite, and we don't become better because of the adversity that we are facing in these times. And that's why, for me, one of the people that I draw inspiration from, there's a lot of Muslim people that I draw inspiration from, a lot of Muslim scholars, obviously the prophets and so on and so forth. But there's actually one individual who is not a Muslim, who died as a non-Muslim, who, for me, is a person of inspiration. Yeah, I don't share his faith. I don't share his creed. But for me, what he did in life is an inspiration for me today, and that's Martin Luther King Jr. Because he remained calm, and he remained patient, and he persevered in some very, very difficult times. And I look at that, and I look at what Muslims are going through today with the Islamophobia and hatred and all that kind of stuff, the feelings of helplessness. And I often speak to Muslims, and I'm like, listen, I know you feel helpless. I know that every time something happens, an attack happens, a terrorist attack happens, something happens, not even America, happens in Europe or here, in Africa, or here, there, wherever it happens, I know you're sitting at home watching TV, and you're like, first of all, you're like, not again. I can't believe it's happening again. Second, it's common. I know you may be overcome with a sense of hopelessness, where you're like, no matter how many people I talk to about Islam, no matter how much I live the life of a Muslim, and people see that Muslims are not violent, that's an extreme minority, no matter what I do, all that work that I've done is just undone by this one action. This is one thing that occurred, and that's a sense of hopelessness. And you know what? In reading the struggles that people went through in the 60s and even earlier, many people in the African American community, they were losing hope too. They were feeling like no matter what we do, there's going to be no improvement. Like we cannot move forward. Like there's no solution. And with all due respect to someone who I love very, very much, Malcolm X, may Allah have mercy upon him, for a lot of his career, he was cynical. I mean, let's be honest, right? Like he was cynical, and he took a path of, it was a path of resistance. But for me, I look at that and not to criticize Malcolm X, because like I said, I have a deep amount of respect for Malcolm X. But it was a little bit of a cynical approach. And to me, that was a loss of hope to say, you know what, this race cannot change, or this race is just this way. Like they will always hate us, they will always oppress us. And it's only like, those of you who know the life of Malcolm X, only like close to the end of his life where he was able to break through that. And to me, that's the real Malcolm X. That's the Malcolm X that I truly remember, where he got closer to the vision of Martin Luther King Jr., where he was able to be hopeful and he was able to dream. And so, for me, when I look at the life of MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., one of the things that really stands out for me is his ability to dream. And if you look at his life, he didn't just, look, we can all dream. When things are fine and things are going well and life is happy and like everything's great. Yeah, you can dream about whatever. But it takes a lot of courage and a lot of hope to be able to dream in a difficult situation. Where life sucks, everything is going horrible, everything is going against you, and you're like, I dream of a better day. Right? And that dream, what we learned from Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement, is that dreams lead to action. It's not just dreams, and I've heard people criticize that, like, oh, you just dream of a better day, and it's never going to happen. And to me, that's the extremist approach. When you say, hey, it's never going to get better. People are by nature hateful. People are by nature, they're going to want someone to blame, and we're looking at a clash of civilizations. To me, that's the rhetoric of extremists. Whether it be ISIS on one hand, and Al-Qaeda and those people, or white supremacists, and dare I say it, even people like Donald Trump, or at least the message that he's putting across there now, that to polarize society that way and try to bring a clash of civilization and say, you know what, it's Muslims against the rest of the world, and that's what gives us purpose. No. What gives us purpose is humanity and hope in that humanity. And so, like I said, it's a dream, but what we have learned is that dreams lead to action. We also learned from, and this is a lesson for not just Muslims, but everyone, Americans as a whole, that when we dream, we create leaders. What I mean is we create a sense of leadership amongst the common man. Meaning the common man can now say, you know what, I can make a difference. I can pick a field, I can pick my strength, something that I'm good at, and I can bring benefit and goodness to humanity. And that's why, in the Civil Rights Movement, we saw average people who are not known for anything pick up the baton and take the lead. And you know what? We see Muslims doing that today. We have seen a rise in activists, for example, which I can tell you 10 years ago, there was no such thing as a Muslim activist. Right? Everyone was just, calm, simply living their life as Muslims. Yeah, I go to the mosque, every Friday, and that's it. I live a private life, and I don't need to interact. And there was no real involvement, no engagement in society. But that, I think, is a lesson that we learned from the Civil Rights Movement that is very important. And that, to me, is a big lesson that young people can now say, hey, I can make a difference. You know what, I'm not special, I don't have this, and I'm not that, whatever, but I can become special. I can become special because I can dream to make a difference. Also, we have learned from the Civil Rights Movement, like I said, there are so many parallels between what Muslims are going through today and the Civil Rights Movement. What we learned is that adversity can bring us together, unlike anything else. This is a time where we can put our differences aside and come together for the common good. And this is a message not only to Muslims, but to non-Muslims as well. For America, our way forward right now is to put our hands together, Muslims, non-Muslims, people of faith, people of no faith, to put our hands together and come to a common solution. Because if we keep isolating groups, and we keep isolating people, keep putting people aside, it's going to be more and more difficult for us to solve these very real solutions and these very real problems. And I'll share with you a personal story, something that happened to me. I was flying in from Canada to the States, to DC, and I get randomly checked every time I fly into the US. And once again, I was being randomly checked, except, when you fly in, I don't know if any of you know this, but if you fly in from Canada, most of the airports, if you fly in from Canada, especially Toronto Airport, you do customs and immigration in Canada instead of US. So that's what happened, and I had enough of a layover. My flight was in about, I think, 3 hours or so. So I was like, how many questions can they ask me? I think 3 hours is a good enough time for me to make it through and then catch my flight. And, they swipe my passport. No, I'm used to this now. Swipe my passport. Oh, you've been selected for random secondary screening. I'm like, okay. And I know where to go. I know where to sit down. And now I'm waiting and I'm waiting and I'm waiting. Like, I have my passport. I don't know what's going on. And I wait for, I think, maybe over an hour, hour and a half. And I'm just sitting. And I don't know if any of you have been there. Some Muslims have been there. But you just sitting there, you feel like a criminal. Right? You're like, I feel like I've done something wrong. And like you don't know. There's like all these cops and things like that. And, these officers with these big badges and like these guns and stuff like that, and they're walking around like, you come here, and things like that. So and so, come to the office. So Like, even if you've never done anything, you're like, man, I feel like a criminal sitting here. And so I sat there, hour and a half. I don't know what's going on. I don't have my passport, which Americans who have ever traveled outside of America, you feel very vulnerable without your passport in your hand. Right? If you live in America, you've never gone outside America, like, you don't know what it's like. But going outside America, your passport is like your life. It's like my identity is in this one document right here. So when someone takes your passport, you feel completely vulnerable. And you know, and crazy thoughts start coming to your mind. Like, what if the dude comes back and he's like, who are you? Right? Like, why are you here? Like, I'm taking you to Guantanamo. I don't know, right? Taking you to Guantanamo. What do I have to prove to him to say I'm an American citizen? I was born in Albany, Georgia, blah, 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 blah. Like, there's nothing, I have nothing to prove who I am. And you know, obviously all these horror stories come to my mind. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen. And then finally, you know, this guy comes to me, and this officer comes, takes me into this back room, this tiny little office, and he starts asking me questions. And, before he starts asking me questions, he goes, you're clearly upset. And I'm like, yeah, as a matter of fact, I am upset. He goes, why? He goes, have you been here a few times? I'm like, yeah, every time I enter the U.S., I come here. And he goes, listen, you know, I'm not trying to make your life difficult or whatever, this and that. I just have to question you. And then he starts questioning me. And he's like, what did you do? Where did you go? What did you talk about? This and that. And he even said to me, he said, can I see your notes from the lecture that you gave, from the talk that you gave? And by the way, most Americans are not used to being treated like that, right? If you ask Muslims, they're like, oh, yeah, not a big deal, like it happens, NPT, so it's okay. Someone says, hey, hand me your phone and I need to copy all the data on your phone. And hand me your laptop and I need to make a copy of your laptop. And anything else that you have on you, I need to look through your wallet, I need to look through the photos on your phone and all that. Most Americans are not used to this. But Muslims are like, okay, you know what, fine. For the sake of national security, let's do it. And so he's asking me all these questions, where have you been, what did you do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm answering his questions. And then I look at my watch and I'm like, yeah, there's about like 15 to 20 minutes before my flight takes off. And I'm like, hey man, I've been asked these same questions every time I enter the U.S. Every single time I come to the U.S., I get asked these same questions. Don't you guys have a file on me or something? Like, why do you have to ask me this question? And he's like, what's the problem? Like, the problem is, you're just gonna ask me the same questions you've asked me a dozen times before. And I'm gonna miss my flight. He goes, don't worry, we'll put you on the next flight. I'm like, yeah, well, the next flight is 8 hours from now. And I've been traveling since the morning, and my wife and my son, who I haven't seen in a few days, he's a year old, he's waiting for me at home. How do you think this makes me feel? Right? And I'm like, listen, I understand. For the sake of national security, like, do you think I'm not as invested as you are? And I'm like, do you know what I do for a living? I'm like, hey, listen, I travel around, not only America, I travel around the world talking about the dangers of extremism and radicalization and teaching young Muslims the proper version of Islam. I'm like, what you are doing is you're making me want to just quit my job. You know, because I don't have to do it. I can just go get a 9-to-5. Like, I have a degree. I can just go get a normal job, be designing flyers or something, websites. Like, I can do that. But I chose to take this path because I care about not only Muslims, but I care about America. And I care about the world, and I care about what's happening in the world. That's why I go do what I do. And you know what? He looked at me in that moment, and he said, I'm sorry. He said, I'm sorry. He said, this is my job. I have to do. Like, I have to do it. And he said, I wish there was another way. He goes, you know, when we look at you, you're a young Muslim, you're bearded. And one of the questions he asked me is, he said, are you a devout Muslim? And I'm like, you know, that's a very personal question, right? Like in normal everyday society, you can't walk up to someone and be like, hey man, do you believe in God? Like, are you devout Muslim? That's a very personal thing. And he goes, I only say that because, you know, the San Bernardino attacks, they were devout Muslims as well. So I'm like, now every devout Muslim is a suspect. Is that what you're telling me? And he realized, as soon as he said it, he realized what he was saying. And in that moment, and I'm like, and as soon as I was like, listen, you just make me want to quit my job. You make me, and he was like, no. We need you. And I'm like, exactly, you need me. Because we need each other. And we need to work together if we're going to solve these problems. Do you think by harassing Muslims and stereotyping Muslims, do you think that's going to make Muslims want to become more radicalized or less radicalized? I'm like, what you're doing is you are feeding in to the ISIS rhetoric that, you know what, they just hate you because you're Muslim. and they're going to harass you just because you're Muslim. I'm like, you are doing more damage than good. And I told him, I said, you know, I have to go around undoing the damage that you do. I have to go around and talk to Muslims and be like, you know what? This is for national security and so on and so forth. And these are difficult times and all that kind of stuff. And in that moment, you know, he realized, I'm really, and you know, praise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, praise to God that he realized what is actually happening here. And that, I think, and I hope that was a big eye-opening moment for him. But I hope the rest of society, all of us as Americans, can learn that lesson. Now more so than any other time, we have to come together. And you know what? One of the reasons why the civil rights movement was successful, I'm not going to say just because of this one reason, but one of the things that really helped was that all races joined hands. There were good people from all races who came together and said, let's solve this problem. And I think for America now, for us, this is what has to happen. This is what has to happen. We have to unite and we have to come together. Now, I'm going to leave you with a couple of points that I think, and this is from thinking about this whole idea of unity. It's one thing to say, and I get this a lot, it's one thing to say that we should be united. It's another thing to actually get united, right? Because I'm sure it feels good, and people love hearing, like, yeah, let's unite, let's come together, and let's move forward, let's be hopeful. And it's a nice thing to hear. But what practical steps can we take to actually becoming united? What do we need? So, number one, first thing we need is that there has to be a sense of sympathy. We have to start talking about sympathy. Unless we can sympathize with one another, we're not going to be able to come together. And when I say sympathize with one another, I mean in all directions and everyone. So that means people who are non-Muslims sympathizing with Muslims. And maybe just trying to understand the challenges that Muslims are going through in these difficult times. But I also mean, and this is my message for Muslims, I also mean it works the other way as well. We have to sympathize and understand that people are afraid. What they see on TV are people being killed and blown up, and it's always pointed to just one group. It's always pointed to, and unfortunately, instead of naming that group, a whole religion gets named. But for people, their fears are played upon. And we need to be able to sympathize with those people, except rather than just saying, oh, they just hate us. Or you know what, they're just bigoted. Or you know what, there's this fear-mongering and that's it, and there's nothing we can do about it. Until we understand, and I've actually had a few conversations with some pretty racist guys. I had a conversation with somebody who had a swastika tattoo on him. And he actually came up over the course of our conversation. And the only way I was able to talk to him was because I was able to because I tried to understand where he was coming from. And you know what? That is, for Muslims, that is what Allah teaches us in the Quran. Allah, in a few places in the Quran, tells us of how to deal with people who show hatred and animosity towards us. And I'll share with you just one verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, خُذِ الْعَفْوِ. Allah says, show forgiveness. So here's give you an example of a situation that happens. You're out and about, somebody comes up to you, and they're like, hey, ISIS, or hey, terrorist, hey, Osama bin Laden. Okay, what happens in this case? How do you respond? First of all, God says, show forgiveness. Forgive their behavior. Why? Because if you don't forgive them for their behavior, you're not going to be able to have any type of dialogue, any type of discussion. It's going to be case closed and right there. You're going to cuss them out back or whatever. You're like, no, you racist, or whatever it is. And it ends right there. There's no moving forward. So in order for us to move forward, there has to be a sense of forgiveness. So God says, show forgiveness. Next step. وَأْمُرْ بِالْعُرْفِ. And command or enjoin goodness. Meaning, forgiving the person doesn't mean you stay silent. Forgiving the person doesn't mean you don't stand up for what's right. You speak to them in the best possible way, with kindness and with goodness, and you have that dialogue with them. And in the end, the last step is, Allah says, God says, وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْجَاهِلِينَ. And if at that point there's no moving forward, it is only at that point that you turn away from those who are ignorant. That is our default methodology of dealing with anyone who shows hatred and animosity towards us. So, as I said, sympathy is extremely important. Second of all, when we talk about uniting, we have to define our points of unity. Because we're all different, we have different backgrounds, I'm not in this room, we have different faiths, and so we have to pinpoint and identify and say, you know what, this is common ground between us. The first common ground that we have, by the way, everyone here in this room, I believe for the most part, we're American, and we care about America, right? We're human beings, we care about mankind. Hopefully that's true to everyone here. That's a common point, that's a point to start. So as we can sit down with one another and start identifying those common points, we can take a realistic approach towards unity. And for a Muslim, that once again is part of our faith. God says, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى. God says, and come together in goodness and piety. So as a Muslim, our approach is anywhere there is goodness that is taking place, we want to be a part of it. And I'll share with you a lyric from someone who I didn't really listen to, but someone who covered a song of this person. It's a lyric by Bruce Springsteen. But I didn't hear this lyric from Bruce Springsteen. I used to listen to a band called Rage Against the Machine, who covered a song by Bruce Springsteen. And that lyric goes like this. It says, wherever there's a cop beating a guy, wherever a hungry newborn baby cries, wherever there's a fight against the blood and hatred in the air, look for me, Ma, I'll be there. That for us, as Muslims, is anyone whose rights are being trampled upon, anyone who's being oppressed. So when Trump comes out and says all Mexicans are rapists and thieves and all that, as a Muslim, that should upset us. When innocent black kids are being shot in the streets, that as a Muslim, regardless of the kid's faith, should upset us. Because we're in this struggle together. We want to be there for each other, and that is the only way the problem for all of us is going to be solved, if we can come together in that way. And that is the only way we will come together as Americans. And I believe the answer lies, yes, for us Muslims in our faith, but on a larger scale, for us as Americans, all we have to do is go back to our core values: life, liberty, and the pursuit of justice, diversity, freedom, equality. These are values that are going to bring America, and I hate to say it, make America great again. Right? Because that is a travesty to that statement. But I believe we can make America great. We have struggled with so many things in the past, so many challenges we have gone through. We can put our hands together and we can move forward in these times. And that, I believe, and God knows best, that is our path towards peace and unity. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Brother Saad, Tasleem. I know we're running out of time. Everyone has class, so if you could make 2 lines for the food, that would be great.
Sorry, man.
Yeah, like you ran.
One more thing, guys. If you do not have a 1:30 class, we're going to have a Q&A after. So come and join us, ask questions. Thank you very much.
Why don't you just get food and not go to this place? Or any other place?
Pretty sure we walked right in front of it.
Yeah, and there's a YouTube.
Shooting it live.
Let me be in YouTube real quick.
Watching it. This is very interesting.
It's like, why are you? Yeah, she's like in the middle. Why are you asking? She said
Taiwan is part of China. So China is just going to take them wherever possible.
Well, it depends on the movie, because to America, Taiwan and China is different. But to China, Taiwan is part of China. To like some other places, it's
And yeah, and China decided that people of Taiwan gets transferred to Taiwan or not. So those people's lives are the most important China.
not them.
Yeah, so that's what's like gets me scared sometimes. It's also like similar things to Julian Assange. Julian Assange, you don't know him? He's like the lead co-founder of